Welcome to the Invite Health podcast, where our degreed healthcare professionals are excited to offer you the most important health and wellness information you need to make informed choices about your health. You can learn more about the products discussed in each of these episodes and all that Invite Health has to offer at www.invitehealth.com/podcast. First-time customers can use promo code podcast at checkout for an additional 15% off your first purchase. Let's get started.
Isn't it ironic that the United States is one of the most wealthiest nations in the world, but is far from the healthiest? And we see this year after year when they rank the United States in terms of its inferior health status. And this is just something that we have to wrap our heads around and realize that we really are not number one in anything when it comes to health. And this has been a problem for many years in the United States, and it's continuously getting worse when you look at the life expectancy and you look at the access to healthcare. These are many of the different factors that are taken into account when they go through and they rank different nations. Now, Bloomberg Healthiest Country Index, they rank 169 different countries, and the United States falls roughly around 35th in terms of the health status of this nation. The top healthiest nations include places like Spain, Italy, Iceland, Japan, Switzerland, Sweden, Australia, Norway, Israel, as well as Singapore. And there's a lot of different things that they take into consideration, and much of which they focus on is things such as diet and the eating habits within certain communities or within certain nations really can have a huge impact. One of the main focuses that they usually hone in on is the Mediterranean diet and understanding that reduction of risk when it comes to heart disease, as well as the many other numerous health benefits that go along with that. They were referencing a study from the British Journal of Nutrition that found that following a Mediterranean diet was associated with a 25% lower chance of death from any cause. Now, I've talked in excess at times regarding the Mediterranean diet, but we certainly realize that in this country, people do not adhere to that. People follow a standard American diet, and it is due to this and due to what we now recognize as diabesity as being a major issue here in this country. So I want to talk about that in some detail today. So I am Amanda Williams, MD, MPH, and let's discuss diabesity. What exactly is that? Well, it's a modern epidemic, and it indicates the coexistence of both diabetes and obesity. And there are many pathophysiological mechanisms revolving around insulin resistance and having high insulin levels, basically. So if you have insulin resistance, at the end of the day, you're going to end up with elevations in insulin. And we have to be able to correlate this back to poor physical activity as well as poor dietary intake. So diet and exercise do play a significant role in this. When we break it down in terms of the management of diabesity in this country, it is really quite staggering. And what I mean by that when I say staggering, when we look at the age-adjusted prevalence of obesity and diagnosed diabetes in this country, and say we go back into the 1990s, for example, it's absolutely alarming to see the maps. Like if you could look and pull up the maps that come from the Health and Human Services, where they break it down, say in 1994, how many states had what percent of people who were diabetic. And at that same time, how many of those states had what percent of people who were obese. And then we look at, 2015, those same maps. And it's just astonishing to see the rate in which obesity and hence diabetes have partnered up with each other and basically created this horrible epidemic that is just flooding through the country. I will use, for just an example, the state of Florida. So if we look at the obesity rates in the state of Florida back in 1994, we're looking at less than 14% of the overall population. When we looked at the rate of diabetics in the state of Florida in 1994, we're looking at roughly 5% of the state population. Now let's fast forward to 2015. Let's use Florida's data once again, and let's look at the rate of obesity as a population as a whole. And it is greater than 26% of the overall population in the state of Florida is technically considered to be obese. Now let's also look at the rate of diabetics in the state of Florida, and we see that that number has gone up exponentially greater than 10%. So we certainly can see this, and we know that this sky-high obesity prevalence is this driving force. We know that a staggering 42% of Americans are obese, and nearly 32% are overweight, which means we have less than 30% roughly of Americans that are technically at a healthy weight. And this excess body weight that Americans are carrying around and the inadequate physical activity are certainly associated with many different things, including higher blood pressure, elevated lipid levels or cholesterol levels, as well as that increase in chronic inflammation. Now we know that when we have these factors that start to build up, then we are certainly marching down that path towards, going from metabolic syndrome and prediabetes into full-blown type 2 diabetes. And this is an issue, and we need traditional doctors to start to recognize this, seeing that, yes, there are many different reasons as to why there is this increased spike across the entire country when it comes to obesity as well as diabetes. But if we don't start to address this as a nation as a whole in terms of a public health crisis, then we are going to continue to slip down that list of healthy nations. I mean, right now, like I said, we're hovering around 35 out of that 169 countries that they look at. We're just going to keep slipping down, and we have to be realistic about this. Now, we certainly know that when it comes to diabetics, that when we look at the increased risk of things such as heart attacks, kidney failure, amputations, for example, we know that diabetics have a incredibly higher risk. We can look at all of the different advancements that have come about in terms of medicinal or pharmacological approaches to managing diabetes, but yet we're still missing the big picture. So this is why we see this uptick in all of these diabetic disorders. And we are not winning the war on diabetes. If anything, we are actually doing worse. And like I said, you don't have to look much further than to see that rate of growth of diabetics across this country. At the same time, we're seeing that rising rate in obesity. So this is why I wanted to talk about this just in some general terms today. So diabetes is certainly a real thing, and we understand that insulin resistance, certainly, that's a hallmark characteristic of type 2 diabetes. And what happens really with insulin resistance is when cells in the muscle, the liver, and other parts of the body just do not respond appropriately to insulin. And as a mechanism for the body to try and manage that, the body actually increases the secretion of insulin coming from the pancreas, resulting in higher insulin blood levels. Now, this is one area that used to just drive me batty when dealing with diabetics, and they'd come in and show me their blood work, and I'd say, well, what's your insulin level? And I say, I have no idea. My doctor just looks at my glucose level. I'd say, we have to know what that insulin level is, because we need to know the rate of your insulin resistance. If we see that your insulin levels are incredibly high, then we have to be able to take the appropriate steps and the appropriate actions to try to get that back in check. And we know that there are so many different complications that go along with diabetes. So you can have all the different microvascular issues. Certainly, this is where we end up with a lot of the damage done to the vision, done to the kidneys, as well as different neuropathies. And these are all very relevant, and they are all directly correlated to the issue of insulin resistance. So at the end of the day, what should we be doing as a country? Well, first and foremost, being more active. That would be a good place to start. And, we also have to start to adhere to a Mediterranean diet. So we are putting into our body the key nutrients that the body actually utilizes in order to function properly in terms of all of the different metabolic pathways. Now, there are things that we can be doing to help to support and assist in this. And this is why when we look at things that come from nature, we oftentimes overlook their real impact and their real importance. We can look at things such as cinnamon bark extract. We can look at banaba leaf, not banana, but banaba leaf extract, and coracoid acid, for example, and noble cactus. These are all nutrients that have been widely studied and shown in human clinical trials to be very effective when it comes to that management of insulin resistance. And for the many Americans who are dealing with this, having those types of nutrients on board on a regular daily basis can do a whole heck of a lot when it comes to the way that your body is actually responding to rises in glucose, as well as managing that insulin spike that can occur. So this is why I bring this up, because we have our formulation called Diabesity. And the Diabesity is a specialized blend of these different nutrients, these different herbal extracts that are really powerful active constituents that have been shown to support healthy blood sugar levels when we are also correlating that up with a healthy diet. So we always have to stress that point. And if we know that a good 10% of Americans have diabetics, and we know that a good 25% of those folks are over the age of 65, and then we look at all the pre-diabetics, we have a good 86 million Americans who are pre-diabetic, then yes, we should be looking at different ways in which we can incorporate these nutrients to better manage the true problem that is occurring. So we can look at something such as the banaba leaf extract, and University up in Ohio, so the College of Osteopathic Medicine at Ohio University, they looked at the impact, the anti-diabetic as well as the anti-obesity activity. So this is important. The anti-diabetic as well as the anti-obesity activity of the banaba leaf extract. And what they were able to find in doing their research was that within the chemical constituents that are derived from that banaba, it actually allowed for a better regulation of blood glucose as well as that insulin response. And the researchers at Ohio University went so far as to say that this herb that's coming from nature could actually mimic many of the drugs that are out there on the market and could be a great therapeutic potential for those who are dealing with diabetes as well as other kidney related diseases. So then we look at something such as the coracoid acid, and understanding that coracoid acid actually can inhibit the proliferation of these different cells. And when it does that, it's leading to this protective layer within the kidney, which is why coracoid acid has once again been widely looked at as being a very beneficial, natural way to regulate the body's response to elevations in glucose as well as in insulin. So we know all of these different things. Most people have probably heard about the important and relevant benefits of cinnamon. And we know that cinnamon intake itself can lower fasting blood glucose levels. And they did a meta-analysis out at the University of California, Davis. And this was through their Department of Nutrition and published in the Journal of Medicinal Foods. And seeing that the botanical components within the cinnamon itself, all of these different polyphenolic compounds could really allow the body to have a better glucose insulin reactive response. And they said that the cinnamon extract can improve fasting blood glucose in people who have type 2 diabetes as well as those who have pre-diabetes. Now, in doing this meta-analysis, basically what they were doing is they were looking at a whole series of different clinical studies and looking at the long-term effect of cinnamon intake on people who had either type 2 diabetes or pre-diabetes. And this is how a meta-analysis actually works, is being able to show the data matching from one study to the next. And when you look at all of these different nutrients, then we can start to say, okay, now it makes sense. This is why they have the, nopal cactus, also known as prickly pear extract. This is why they are utilizing cinnamon extract in this. And we certainly have seen how even the nopal cactus has been studied in the setting of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which we know is also a component when we're looking at diabesity, so that obesity combined with the diabetes. So when you see that partnering up of these different nutrients, these high-powered nutrients that have been studied and tried time and time again, and it's not like they just find these things just by chance. They look at populations in which they've been utilizing these nutrients. So it's not like they just said, oh, hey, look at cinnamon, this must be something good. They recognize that cultures where cinnamon intake is high, and they see these trends. Wow, these people have a lot of cinnamon in their diet, and look at their fasting glucose levels. Same thing when you look at the nopal cactus or prickly pear. When you see that, and this is very common throughout Central America, for example, and in Mexico, when they see the intake of this and they say, wow, now we see this correlation. This has very powerful antioxidant properties, but we can also see the way in which it is supporting a proper glucose insulin response. So diet certainly matters, and this is how, in a sense, you could say we stumble upon these different nutrients. So it goes back to that driving point of healthy foods make a significant impact and how the body is actually reacting and responding every day, which is why when we look at the state of health of this country, we do so poorly. This is why there is now this new modern epidemic trending through this country known as diabesity. And this is not something that is going to go away, even in spite of the fact that they have these brand new fancy pharmacological drugs out there that are targeted towards diabetics, if you don't correct the underlying issue, which is that poor diet, which is lacking those appropriate nutrients, the magnesiums, the chromiums, all of the nutrients that we know that the body needs in order to properly process our glucose and insulin. And then if we are just a lazy nation, and if we are not out and moving about and staying physically active, this is why we see this rising epidemic continue to go throughout, not just here in the United States, but throughout the world. We are seeing diabesity really start to take over. And we know that here in the United States, this is a major problem. And it affects, the healthcare system. It affects people's, everyday individual lives, because then we start to get into the long-term diabetic complications and the reduction in health-related functioning and all of the different things, the reduction of quality of life. I mean, there's so many factors that can lead into it, but yet it is very correctable if we just do the right things. We eat right, we stay physically active. I'm not saying you have to go out and join a gym or, become an avid runner where you're running every day, but just staying physically active to some degree and choosing better foods can make all of the difference. And at the end of the day, it would be nice if we could finally look and say, wow, we're not 35th on the list of the world's healthiest nations. If we can start to work our way back up to the top and have a little pride in that. But that is certainly in our own hands. And I hope from a public health standpoint that diabesity becomes our past and is not a continued factor of our future. So that is all that I have for you for today. I just want to thank you so much for tuning in to the Invite Health podcast. Remember, you can listen to all of our podcasts for free wherever you listen to your podcast or by visiting invitehealth.com/podcast. Do make sure that you subscribe and you leave us a review. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Invite Health. And we will see you next time for another episode of the Invite Health podcast.